Hi everyone, I'm Laura Jones. In this session we're going to be speaking with ultrarunner and explorer John Kelly. John had a very busy year in 2019, which included the Lavaredo 120k, Ronda del Cims 170k, Tor Des Geants and a win at the Frankwinds 200, to mention just four. Some of his career highlights include being the ITU Long Course Age Group World Champion, the RRCA Ultra National Champion, two-time Ironman Age Group Champion, and achieving a Guinness World Record for the fastest marathon dressed as a video game character. Unsurprisingly, he's probably best known for being the 2017 Barkley Marathons winner, becoming just the 15th person to finish the course in 30 years. John runs for Sportiva, Ultimate Direction, Hammer Nutrition and Xoskin. He grew up in Morgan County, Tennessee, later settling in the DC area, but he's currently, with his wife and three children, living and working as a data scientist in the UK. John, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So to start, although I'm desperate to ask you what the video game character was that you were dressed as, we'll leave that till the end and we'll start.
Okay.
Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about you, how your running journey started and where you're at today with your running.
So I kind of grew up running, chasing my brother around, and followed him into doing high school cross country and track. But really kind of took around a decade or so off from running during college and during grad school. Kind of went the intramural sport route, and then once coming out of there, I kind of got back into it. Decided I wanted to try my hand at a marathon, and found my way to trail running, and things kind of snowballed from there. Wow.
So and sort of getting into the ultra running side of things, these great big long distances, how did that happen? What drove you to start wanting to to run those great big distances and driving you to keep pushing forward?
So it was really a matter of, again, kind of a snowball effect of each time I did something, kind of finishing and thinking, well, that was good, but I could do a bit better. I could go a bit farther and probably a bit faster. So that kind of continued through marathons, and then kind of transitioned into doing triathlons, and found my way through to trail races, actually primarily through backpacking, through doing long through hikes, and kind of eventually discovering that there were people that actually went out and did races on the trails, and it was something that as someone who loves the mountains and loves being out there, but doesn't have a whole lot of time to actually travel to them and get out there, it allows me to explore a lot more of them in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, cover the ground a bit quicker, get a bit further. I actually discovered that, bizarrely started riding a bike. I'd never done it before, and I was like, I can go miles on the bike if I've only got an hour, much further than I could if I was running. That's interesting. So over the course of your your career and all the races that you've been, what have been sort of the biggest if you've made any mistakes? I'm sure you have made mistakes. What have been the biggest mistakes that you've made, that you've learned from?
So I guess it depends on what you classify as a mistake. There are certainly mistakes from inexperience that I made in my first couple of attempts at Barkley, related to nutrition and navigation and to general race strategy. Yeah. But I view those as really kind of I don't want to say intentional mistakes, but I went out there knowing that I was inexperienced, and knowing that making those mistakes was the quickest way for me to learn how to do better, rather than taking a more kind of step-by-step cautious approach where I would make fewer mistakes, but eventually it would take me longer to get to my end goal by not making those mistakes and not falling on my face as many times.
Yeah. So you just went in at the deep end. So what, have there been any particular people that have had a real influence on your running, on your ultra running? Anybody in particular that you've sort of influenced you?
I mean, getting started out and having Barkley as my big goal. You know, of course, I was at the time looking at guys like Jared Campbell, who had been there and done that, and were continuing to do that. So certainly people like that, but then outside of that, more just the people you meet along the way, the people that are actually out there, and you're spending the time on the course with. Those are the people who have probably had the most profound effect on me. Starting with, you know, my first Barkley when I was out there with Jameel Curry for the better part of 3 loops, and then, you know, when I finished and was out there with Gary Robbins for most of the race, and then other you know, even going into triathlon, where I've had some great teammates through the years. So those are really the people that at this point I look up to more than anyone.
Are there any other way? Obviously, ultra running has this. From talking to other people that have had long ultra running careers, they've described how it's had quite profound effects on other areas of their lives, how they deal with other challenges and other situations. Has that been the case for you? Do you find that it's changed the way you tackle other things in your life because of the mindset ultra running's given you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, to me, that's one of the biggest reasons for doing these types of crazy things. You know, I often tell people that the longest sane distance for anyone to run is a half marathon.
Right.
After that, it's, you know, you've got to question the motives. But for me, you know, part of those motives are that I learned things about myself that you know, otherwise I would never have any clue of. It's not only kind of strengthening the mindset and this aspect of experiencing tough things allows you to handle them better in the future, but also when you're really pushed to the brink like that, you learn what your weaknesses are, you learn what your strengths are. They're all magnified, ones that would otherwise be hidden, just right out there in the open, as big as can be, and that's something that you can take back to apply to pretty much anything.
Yeah. And I suppose there's always that thing that if you don't, how will you ever know how far you can go if you don't try and go a bit further, isn't it? It's
yeah.
Do you think it's only certain people that have got that mindset? That most people think,
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think so, and you know, that's fine. Different people have different goals and different things that bring them satisfaction and enjoyment. So
yeah,
I think it does require a bit of a unique mindset, and that's why you know, for something like Barkley, there's a strong correlation between finishers and people who have done advanced degrees in engineering and science, where it's just kind of that different mindset and different approach of I have a goal, and nothing is going to stop me. I'm going to continue on full speed until I get there. And it's you know, it's a different kind of hard. You know, there's obviously the physical aspect of it, but a large part of particularly the things that I enjoy doing is that it has that risk of failure, and that risk of the unknown of exactly how hard it is going to be. You know, there's hard as in it's going to take a lot of work and it's going to take a lot of time, but you know that you'll be able to accomplish it. It's basically a very difficult task. And then there are things that are hard goals that really involve this element of possible or even probable failure. And those are the ones that I really think push me farther and give me the most satisfaction when I am able to achieve them. thinking about grad school, you know, the one part of that I can relate is doing my quals, the qualifying exams for my PhD, where, you know, you stand in a room with 3 professors whose their job is to grill you until you break, and if you fail, you get kicked out of school. So that's a similar aspect there.
Worse than Barkley.
Yeah.
Great. So at the moment, you know, short term, what is your sort of focus in your running at the moment?
So I'm, you know, taking a little bit of time to recover right now. I kind of overloaded myself a bit this year. You know, I went about a year ago, left triathlon to go full time into ultras, and then on top of that, I moved to the UK. So it's you know, I got kind of excited and lined up all these big races for me to do. I got my first non-Barkley DNF this year at Ronda del Cims, and really kind of went through the year pretty well perpetually fatigued. So I'm taking a step back to recover right now, focusing on fewer but you know, bigger goals at races next year, and then the next big one. Well, so I'm doing the spine in January.
Oh, right, lovely. And I mean, you know, like I said earlier, I've got 3 children, so I know what it's like, and obviously with work as well. How do you manage? I'm not surprised that you said you in a sort of state of permanent fatigue. How do you manage to fit it all in, to juggle it all?
It's a lot of you know, I'm an engineer, and I enjoy a tough optimization problem, and that's a lot of what it is.
Yeah.
You know, all of my weekday miles for years now have been as my work commute, whether it was running or biking. That's the only way I get miles in during the week, and you know, it's basically free time that I would otherwise be sitting on a bus or on a train. Saves me the cost of the fares as well. And then, you know, outside of that, there's really minimize the little things that can distract from the larger tasks. You know, I'll group them together and set them aside to where they don't disrupt my everyday life. And then outside of that, like you know, I have my family, I have work, and I have running, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, when you think of all the other things that can contribute to taking time, whether it's TV or going to the pub or watching the game or whatever, you know, playing golf, I don't do any of those things, and maybe that sounds a bit boring. I've just chosen to kind of focus on a few things heavily rather than spreading across a bunch of smaller things.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. And I always say one of my favorite things to say is sort of there is time for people who choose to look for it. You know, you maybe you could watch a little bit less telly and do something else if you wanted to, you know.
Yeah. The only time really I watch any shows is if I'm doing a treadmill workout.
Yeah, you can Netflix. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, you know, we're talking about your training and how you fit it in. Do you plan your own training, or do you use a coach? What's your sort of strategy with that?
I was self-coached until April of this year, actually, until right after Barkley, where I kind of got to the point where first I felt I kind of plateaued in terms of what I could do on my own and what I could do by applying the same training stimulus that I had been applying for a few years now. And outside of that, I just I've kind of reached this point with you know, the big schedule this year and moving to the UK and getting a startup off the ground. I didn't have the time or the mental bandwidth to plan those things myself. So I picked up David Roach as a coach, and he's been incredible. So it's been if nothing else, a huge help for me. That's one one less thing that I have to do, one less thing that I have to worry about is actually planning all of that out myself. I don't have to worry about if I'm doing enough. It's there on the sheet, and I do it, and then I'm done, and don't have to think about it anymore.
Well, yeah, one less thing to think about. Did you find it difficult at all to kind of put that trust in someone else, or after doing it yourself for so long?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, and I had some conversations with him up front, obviously, to see if kind of general strategy and approach aligned with my own as far as on the big things that I consider, I guess, uncompromisable. And so those aligned well, and outside of that, again, it's kind of trusting that when things are a little different than what I would do on my own, that shifting up the training stimulus can have benefit, and also being a data person, knowing that they've seen a lot more data points, a lot more athletes, and they know over the long term what works. Whereas me, you know, I might do something on my own and see a short-term benefit, but who knows what the long-term implications of that are. Yeah,
it's really interesting as well to hear your take on it from the sort of scientific and from the data point of view as well. It's really interesting. Okay, I'm positive that our audience will want to hear about Barkley, so maybe you could give us a little bit of an overview of how your training looked leading up to the 2017 race. You know, how do you go about even starting to prepare for something like Barkley?
So it was a lot of hills for the most part, and you know, that's a big thing with Barkley training is over the years the general practice and the general recommendations have progressed to more and more hills, super steep hills, endless hills, to the point where, in my opinion, it went a little too far. Yeah. You know, you've got to still have legit speed and legit running ability to get anywhere on Barkley. And so again, due mostly to time, all of my weekday miles were my commute, which, you know, is limited on what hills I can do. It's just it's to the office and back. So I would focus on speed work and higher intensity things during the week, and then on the weekend I would turn to the hill repeats and the incline treadmill, and it was a whole lot of that, a whole lot of Netflix with a large incline on the treadmill, and then finding the steepest hill near my house where I could, that going to that, and it was 95 feet high, and 1/20th of a mile long. So you know, I could do 10 repeats, and I would get 1 mile and 950 feet. And you know, it was tiny, and there were some very long days out there where I did up to 120 repeats.
Wow.
But it's you know, part of the monotony of that, I think is also beneficial for mental training, and it also comes down to where my training progressed for Barkley over the years. And I started out trying to drive to bigger, better hills, and at some point I realized that, you know, I'm much better off, again, with the limited time, taking the time I have and putting it all towards training rather than
sitting in
losing 20% of the time, driving to a hill or trying to plan a better workout.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, there's an element of Groundhog Day, isn't it? on that on that 100th rep. So, in sort of your peak week of training before you started tapering for Barkley, what sort of mileage would you be hitting?
As I'm sure you'll believe, I have all that on a spreadsheet somewhere. But well, I know exactly where it is. But off the top of my head, I believe my peak week was around 120 miles with 40,000 feet of climbing.
Wow, that's incredible. And that's just, you know, slotting it in around everything else. Amazing. And would you, you know, when you're training for something like Barkley, I know obviously, you know, coming from a triathlon background, you obviously very strong cyclist, but do you use any cross training when you're training for something like Barkley now, or just all running?
So back then, I was still doing triathlon, and so it was I essentially had a 5 or 6 month triathlon season during the summer, and then I had an ultra running season during the winter.
Right.
And so Barkley was at the tail end of that ultra running season before I would transition back to triathlon. And so I would do just a little bit of maintaining my bike and swim fitness during that. I would kind of use a bike / swim day as my recovery day from the harder running. So, you know, that worked pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that's something that helped in your training, the fact that you included those components? Or
the swimming, no. You know, I'm not shy about my strong dislike of swimming, and I also think it doesn't do much for running unless you do just need a relaxing kind of recovery day in the pool, and you enjoy that sort of thing. The biking, I think it maybe did. I think it strengthened my quads a good deal, which historically before that year were kind of always the first things to go for me. And that year, the final loop at Barkley, I mean, my legs were still churning along just fine. It was my mind that was gone. So that is one thing that I do think it could have helped, getting a little bit more strength and high intensity work on my quads without the additional impact of running on top of the high mileage that I was already doing.
Yeah, that's so I just find it so incredible to hear you say that on the final lap your legs were all right. It's just
yeah, they were just kind of, you know, doing their thing underneath my spaced out head. I felt a bit like a zombie at that point.
I'm not surprised after you've been awake for, you know, coming up 60 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your nutrition and hydration strategies. So anything particular that you like, you know, well, let's talk about in training first. Is there anything particular that you like for in training, and then I'll ask you about race day?
So I'm sponsored by Hammer Nutrition. So I stick to those things for the most part when I need training fuel and when I need fuel for any race that really kind of up to the Ironman / 100K ultra distance, things that are going to take me around 10 hours or less. Beyond that, I need a bit more real food, a bit more variety, both for the taste and for the I guess fullness feeling from it. So take along some homemade things, a few snack cakes and whatnot, and then kind of my go-to savory item is pizza whenever I can get it.
Oh wow, that's good. I like that. I'll say John Kelly said pizza is really good when you're training.
Well, yeah, nutrition is kind of especially at those distances, it's very, very individual. You kind of have to find what works for you in terms of what types of things and in what quantity. So the Hammer provides a good kind of universal base for me and for most purposes, but then after that things get a bit more customized.
Yeah, what you feel that you could possibly tolerate, I suppose. And what about during a race? You know, a particular strategy? You know, I talk to some people and they're very very methodical, 100 calories every, so many. Do you work it all out like that? You know, what sort of strategy do you put in place?
Yeah, I do a bit in terms of having general ranges that I'm trying to hit.
Mm-hmm.
Those get adjusted based on race conditions. You know, generally before you put down a decent amount of calories, the best time to do that is right before you start a climb. You've still got your breath going up. There's not as much jostling on your stomach. Gives the food time to settle versus, you know, if you do it during a climb, you're probably too out of breath to eat. If you do it starting a descent, then that's really going to give you some issues, most likely. And then also depending on the weather and how well I'm able to maintain my hydration status as well, because if it's hot, if I start to get a bit dehydrated, then, you know, my body isn't going to have the necessary water to digest what I'm taking in, and things are going to get a bit rough as a result of that, because the last thing you want is anything that sort of causes a slowdown or a blockage in that system.
Yeah, I can imagine. And anything sort of specific that you do when you're racing to help you? I mean, I know a lot of people spend a lot of time analysing the field and the competition and practical things like that, and analysing previous competitors and previous performances. Is there anything practical that you do beforehand to make you get the best out of the race?
So it really depends on the race and what my goals are, whether I'm going for time, whether I have a competitive goal in mind. I have learned, you know, you asked about mistakes earlier. One mistake I have made is not running my own race, and kind of, especially early on, chasing people and running their race, which doesn't work out in the end. So I will kind of you know, strategize my pace a bit when I'm going to take care of certain things, like you know, switching out my nutrition or other gear that I've got on me. But for the most part, I now kind of go by effort and feel based on the duration and conditions of the race.
And also thinking about preparation. What about navigational side of things? How do you have you sort of found that in races and in navigating?
So I mean, most races are obviously pretty well marked. Of course, Barkley is a huge exception to that. So, you know, if there's a GPS track, I'll put that on my watch. I'll see if there are any kind of really tricky parts of the course, anything I can identify in the map or in the kind of pre-race briefing information. But you know, outside of that, there's only so much that you can kind of memorize and keep in your head going into the race. So it's more a matter of just during the race, keeping your wits about you and being sure you are following the markings, and you're double checking yourself if there is any part that's questionable.
Yeah, this is the downside of being the leader as well, isn't it? If you're in the front, you've got no one to follow.
Yeah, so, it's
you know,
anywhere up there it gets pretty sparse, and you've got a, you know, high chance that you're going to be by yourself.
Yeah, quite. So obviously, you know, 2017 completing the Barkley Marathon is a massive accomplishment. What do you think it is about you that made you be one of those so few people that have been able to do it?
So it's a unique combination of things. I mean, definitely the most unique probably is the motivation for it, and the right kind of mindset and mental skill set. The you know, the physical aspects are obviously also a huge thing, but you know, I'm the first to admit I'm not the fastest person out there. There are plenty of people that will smoke me on a straight race of pretty much any distance. So it's kind of a unique intersection of things that go into being able to finish Barkley, and I happen to kind of sit at that intersection where any one of those individually, there are better people than me. But the biggest one is I think having that level of motivation on top of the necessary skills to do it, because I don't care how skilled you are. At some point in that race, every part of your body and your mind is going to be screaming at you to just quit, that it's not worth it. Go back to camp, rest up, and go home. And so you've got to have something that's pushing you to get through that.
How hard is it on that to go out on that fifth lap?
So I mean, going out on the fifth lap, it really isn't that hard. I would say going out on the fourth is probably the hardest.
Really?
I think in any race of that distance, it's not the last part that's the hardest. It's the next to last part, because that's where you're at the confluence of feeling horrible and still having a pretty horrible amount of distance left. Whereas once you get to the last part, you get to the fifth loop on Barkley, the goal is within reach, and you've got it there, a carrot on a stick right in front of you that's pulling you along.
Yeah.
I mean, going out on that fifth loop was never any question, never any choice of that. So getting through it was tough.
Yeah, I can imagine. Is there anything specific that you when it gets difficult mentally, any specific strategies that you use, any particular things that you sort of think about, or
So I keep myself very fixated on the goal. The very end, when my mind was pretty much gone, I was having trouble staying awake. I stayed fixated on that one thought of getting to the finish. That was the one thing I had the mental bandwidth for, and that's what allowed me to kind of block everything else out and continue towards that finish. The other aspect is just thinking back on everything that went into it. And sure, like maybe you're in a rough spot at the moment. Maybe the last stretch of the race is going to be tough, but it would be a lot tougher to go through all the training and all the time necessary to get back to that point in a future year.
Yeah, it's already hurting. I may as well keep going a bit longer.
Yep.
This in 2019 at the Ronda del Cims, you had your first normal DNF, because we're not going to count Barkley. What did you learn from that, apart from, like you said earlier, that the year was the load was pretty heavy? Anything else that kind of taught you?
Yeah, so I didn't adapt to the conditions well enough. So as I mentioned earlier, I kind of didn't run my own race as well as I should have. It was hot, and I went out with the lead group, kind of not used to those conditions, especially having lived all summer in the UK, where it doesn't really get hot here.
No. Or it just gets really hot for like a week. With we're not prepared for it. It just comes, massive heat wave, and then it's gone.
Yeah. So, rather than kind of adapting to those conditions and how I was feeling early on, I pushed on until it reached kind of a breaking point where I had to call it.
Yeah. And after a race, and also during your training, how do you sort of analyze your performance? You mentioned earlier that you've got, obviously you've got spreadsheets. So how do you sort of analyze, after a race, what worked and what you're going to use, perhaps in your next training block? How do you sort of keep your records and analyze that sort of thing?
Yeah, so it's largely a matter of kind of thinking back to where those forks in the road in a race war. There are kind of usually you can identify a few pivotal moments, a few decisions you had to make, whether it was taking a nap at a certain time, or taking an extra bit of calories at a certain time, or surging on a climb, putting on an additional piece of gear, or not putting on an additional piece of gear is something that has cost me a number of times. So on any of those, thinking back to was that the right decision? In either case, why was it right, or why was it wrong, and what should I do the next time that situation comes around? So it's more for me on race strategy than on training. The training is mainly just going to be if I do have a particular physical deficiency, if I'm, if feeling weak on the climbs or something of that nature.
And you mentioned then about thinking about the gear that you use. Are there any pieces that you really rely on, that you really recommend, in thinking about your sort of key kit?
Yeah, so I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm a little bit more conservative on it. There's good gear out there as far as really lightweight raincoats that weigh next to nothing, take up next to no space, and the amount of the difference that they make is enormous in terms of if you get in a rough spot, if you get just a bit cold or a bit wet. So that's definitely something that I'll pretty much always have on me, unless I'm doing a race and it's 100 degrees and scorching or something.
Yeah.
Pretty much always a headlamp of some sort, and always some kind of it's a race, and if you're racing it, you kind of want to think, well, I should go as lightweight as possible, but at the end of the day, safety is still paramount. So some kind of a emergency kit as far as first aid and whatnot.
Okay, and any particular your pack? Do you have a particular pack that you prefer, or?
Yeah, so I've used the Ultimate Direction line for a number of years now. I guess kind of my general go-to is the mountain vest. It's got a good deal of space in it while still being really lightweight, so it's quite versatile, and it's got the two chest soft flask holders, which is my preference. So that's worked quite well for me, and I've used others depending on if it's a shorter race or a longer adventure that I'm doing. But that's kind of in general what I'm usually in.
Oh, lovely, thank you. I'm just thinking about recovery now and sort of injury prevention, apart from maybe taking some time off running. Anything else that you do to help make sure that you recover well after these big races?
So I mean, I think that for me, taking a bit of a mental recovery is pretty important. One thing that I don't do nearly as well as I should is sleep. So I mean, that's both during training and after the race. It's a pretty important thing. But again, with the time constraints, sometimes it's the easiest thing to let slip a bit, and especially after a race where I'll typically have the pattern where I'll be trying to rest up for the race leading into it, and as a result of resting up, I'll have a bunch of work that piles up, and then immediately after the race, I have to get to that. So I'm not able to rest and recover as well as I should. But I would say that your mind knows best in these sorts of things, and that's both in terms of mental and physical recovery. As soon as your mind feels like running again, and as soon as your body feels like running again, then you'll be ready. That's kind of where the approach that I take on it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm going to ask you a couple of things now about that might help. What do you, for our audience, what do you believe are 3 characteristics that help you to be successful in ultra running?
Well, the first one is not being afraid of whether or not you'll be successful. You know, not being afraid of failure, just going out and trying to reach as far as I can, however far that might be, and that might mean I reach a bit too far sometimes, and I fall flat on my face, but that's fine, and I think that's necessary. You know, it would be one thing if we all had infinite time to see how far we could go, but you know, I'm not going to be young forever, so I'll sacrifice some failure in order to get to my limits faster.
Yeah.
And
courage definitely one.
Yeah, and you know, I'd say consistency, and I would almost say stubbornness. You know, we could put a positive spin on that word and call it tenaciousness or determination. But at the end, it kind of comes down to the same thing, where again you get fixated on a goal, and you know, nothing's going to stand in your way. Obstacles are opportunities. And you continue on, no matter the circumstances, whether that's in a race or in training, because these things are of such distance that there are going to be obstacles. There are going to be huge ones, and if you can't get through those, you're never going to make it to the end. It's kind of like, you know, if your goal is to flip a coin and just have it land on heads, and you're doing something short, you only flip it twice, sure, you'll get there without failing. But if your goal is to get 100 heads, you're going to get a lot of tails along the way, and you just got to keep going through that. And you know, I guess a third would kind of be related to that, and would just be focus in terms of being able to tune out distractions, whether it's during the race or during training, of you know, having a little bit of tunnel vision, not complete tunnel vision, because obviously there are things that are much more important than racing and then training. But not letting the small things sort of be a distraction towards the longer term goal. Yeah.
Just out of interest, because obviously, you know, for a lot of people, ultra running is not, you know, a sport that masses of people follow. Did your sort of your friends and your colleagues and realize when you finished Barkley, did they kind of realize quite how monumental of an achievement it was? You know, do you know, the average people who aren't on the ultra running scene, did that sort of make them think, oh, you know, he's quite good at this?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, there are kind of two camps on that. You know, I generally say, yeah, I'm well known in a niche within a niche.
Right.
You know, this small Barkley is kind of this small section within the ultra running community, which is itself a small section within the running community, small section within kind of the general population. So you zoom in enough, and there I am. And if you're not within that tiny section, you know, it's difficult for you to really be able to measure or assess the achievement. I still don't think anyone that kind of hasn't been out there can fully understand. But with the documentary and the you know, outlandish statistics as far as the amount of ascent in the race, the number of people who finished. That gives people a pretty good idea. But at the same time, there's this large thing that you'll really find not only in running but in any endeavor, where once you get past a certain threshold, to the general population, it's kind of just it's all the same. It all just registers as big. So you know, doing a 50K, doing Barkley, it's all kind of incomprehensibly big to someone that doesn't do those sorts of things, and it's kind of all the same, which is that's fine. You know, in a sense, it kind of is.
Yeah, I think the thing, after you mentioned the documentary, and I think a thing that made a lot of people sort of sit up and realize, was when they said that the ascent is the equivalent to climbing Everest twice, and a lot of people sort of went, wow. We knew it was hilly, we didn't realize.
Yeah, you know, we have a bit more oxygen and a bit less snow, but also, you know, more briars. Yeah,
quite. Yeah, more uncomfortable. Okay. So if any of our the people that are watching are kind of, you know, at the very beginning of this, perhaps thinking about booking their first ultra, what would be your sort of main piece of advice to someone who is sort of just thinking about starting out?
Find one that really excites you. Don't do it just because you want to do an ultra. Find a course that excites you, or a goal that is personally meaningful to you. Again, whether it's due to the location, due to the type of course, due to other people you know doing it, but you know, when things get tough, just having a goal of, oh hey, I want to do an ultra to say that I did an ultra, chances are that might not get you through those tough spots. So be sure you have some additional ammunition when you get in that situation.
Find your motivation. That's a good idea. Yeah. And what about anybody who is sort of already fairly established and is looking to kind of progress to the next level, and you know, perhaps, you know, improve their performance, or, you know, perhaps go further? Any particular advice you'd give anyone that was looking to progress?
So that'll vary quite a bit depending on what stage someone is at, but I think again, kind of a universal thing that can apply across all of those is don't be afraid of taking that next step. You know, you might fail to start off with, and that's fine. So go for it.
Yeah. Okay, and so finally, the last question is going to be, looking back at your journey or your experiences or the things that have happened, if you could give 3 pieces of advice, what would they be?
Oh, geez. That's a tough one. You know, I would say, well, outside of the things that I've already said, you know, I feel like I've repeated myself a bit with a few of them, so I'll try not to do that. But you know, don't lose sight of why you're doing it, and what the sort of your long-term goal is, and choose the intermediate goals that can best get you there. Choose things that are challenging, but that you still enjoy. And as far as starting out, again, the training that you can do is always the best training. If you have a limited time, or you have limited knowledge of training, just get out there and run. You know, if you have 10 hours a week to go run, or even 5 hours a week, you know, go use that for running. Get the volume in, get the time in. That's going to serve you much better than trying to go to the perfect location, or trying to plan the perfect workout, and eating in to a huge chunk of your time as a result. Once you start to progress, then you can worry about refining things a bit. And then I guess the last thing would be to don't lose sight of recovery. You know, I mentioned that I'm not always the best on that, but it's an enormous part of improving and being able to continue to enjoy this over the long term. You know, the kind of people that do ultra running and do endurance sports in general kind of have the mindset where they're just going to keep going, and things are going to hurt, and they're going to keep going, and things are going to hurt, and they're going to keep going. And you know, in some circumstances that's good, but we have to remember when that's beneficial and when it's not. And training and improvement is this process of kind of going harder and harder and breaking your body down to a point where your body needs to recover, and then going hard again. And that's how improvement happens, this continual process of breaking it down and then building it back up stronger than it was before. If you just continually do nothing but break down, you're not going to go anywhere. So don't be afraid to recover.
Oh, that's, yeah, good advice. And the practical advice from someone that's fitting it in around, you know, other commitment that isn't just ultra running is, I think, really interesting. And it's, you know, to hear you say, just take the time when you can get it. It doesn't have to be the perfect session. It's not always going to be the perfect conditions, but at least you got out there and you've got the miles in your legs. It's because that is how it is for a lot of people, isn't it? You know, a lot of us that are fitting it in and juggling all these balls.
And if it's not on Strava, it did in fact still happen.
Yeah,
it's okay. So,
what about if you didn't
can go run without your watch?
A selfie on there.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's more or less bringing us to the end of the interview. Thank you ever so much for giving us some of your very precious time, John. We're really, really grateful. Wish you the best of luck at Spine. Everyone, you can go and check out John online. We'll add the links, including to his website, which is randomforestrunner.com. It's really interesting reading. So we'll put the links there so you can go and check him out. So thank you everybody for watching, and thank you again, John.